All right, so we are here live for another Chat and Learn. It's a beautiful Friday. I really appreciate everyone for taking the hour out of their Friday to join this 1 hour live chat. We've got one of our favorite guest speakers here. We've invited her back. This is not her first rodeo, so I'm very excited to hear what she has to share with us today. But before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. You all have taken the time to join us, and I really appreciate it. We're calling from basically all over the world. We've got some people calling from Switzerland, from Marietta, Georgia, from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm in Argentina. Barb is in Philly. Our guest speaker's in Philly. We've got New Jersey, New York, Iowa, Phoenix. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to, everyone's time zone, especially with the recent time change. I really appreciate that. And I just want to say that I've put everyone on mute upon entry just to avoid any background noise, but you are always, always, always encouraged to take yourself off of mute, share your voice, put yourself on camera for visibility's sake. We want this to be catered to you for this hour. You're joining us live. So you have submitted some beautiful questions. And if you want to dive deeper, or if you want to, tell an anecdote or give your perspective, feel free to join in. You can also drop in the chat at any point. If you want to write privately, please write to me and I will keep you anonymous. If you do have something that's very sensitive that you prefer Barb to read, you can write her privately as well. But just know that, we want you all to be focused. I know that some of you are multitasking, so focused in the sense of, you are able to participate. So you're taking the time out of your day. Please participate if you can. And I will sound like a broken record by the end of this chat because I want everyone to, join forces here and share knowledge. With that said, this is being recorded live. So this will be on Power to Fly on our video chat page so that you can, take notes and really pay 200% attention to what we are going to dive into today. So I'm already saying a lot. I want to just go ahead and dive into this chat because you all submitted some beautiful questions. But first, let's introduce our guest speaker. Barb, I'm not going to read what's on the screen. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you came to know Power to Fly and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a background in statistics. I have a degree in statistics, and then I went to work for a insurance company as a data analyst. And it was a great job and everything, but I kind of wanted to do, believe it or not, more math. So I went to work for a statistician directly. The statistician had like a PhD, and he actually testified in the national court cases that you would see on TV. And I did every piece of that with him up until he went into the courtroom. So it was like the coolest job ever. But he decided to start going into retirement. And I was like, oh, no, I love doing this kind of consulting. How can I kind of continue this, but not exclusively with lawyers, which he did some other non-lawyer stuff too. And that's when I started Boxplot, my consulting firm. And we take all kinds of clients, and we do only statistical analysis. So niche in that sense, but not niche in the sense of like, I've had all kinds of different industries, HR, legal, accounting, sales, marketing, like all over the place. So yeah, my whole career has been in statistics, and I think I got introduced to Power to Fly. I don't think Lauren's asked me that before. I don't remember. It was a while ago, but probably like coming across, different groups online or a search or something like that. But I'm glad I did, and I'm glad that we do these. And yeah, that's my background.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Offline, we had a chance to chat for those of you who are just joining us or who are watching this recorded video. So Barb and I got a chance to chat a little bit. And then also I've been chatting with some of our live callers. If you have just joined us and you want to give Barb some background information so that she can really, try to cater these responses to fit your needs, that would be great. Barb, I'm just going to flag a couple that I've written already so that as we're going through the questions, you can go ahead and keep those in mind. So we have digital marketing and interested in learning SQL to help with my career change. My background is in professional services and international development. I'm currently transitioning into UX, where I'll be more in content strategy, UX writing, content marketing. I'm a product manager that is interested in learning more about SQL. Let's see, I'm in IT tech support, but want to learn more about SQL to further my career in hiring options. I'm just learning to code, self-taught thus far, but considering a coding bootcamp in the new year. I'm an SQA engineer working in analytics, but wanting to test more back-end work. I need to know SQL to query data from Oracle using business objects and Tableau. So continue to drop whatever you want in the chat. Barb, that's a lot for you to soak in for now, and I will go ahead and keep bringing this up to your into the slides as we present. Thank you all for participating so far. Love the engagement. Keep it up. With that said, you all have submitted so many questions, so many beautiful questions on Power to Fly before, and we have queued these up to flow nicely throughout the hour, and you can refer back to these on our recorded chat. So let's just jump right into this first question here. And again, if this is your question, if you see your question come up on the screen and you would like to dive a little deeper, or maybe some things have changed since you submitted that question, feel free to unmute yourselves or to put yourself on camera and let us know how we can help you out. So, all right, let's jump into this first question. Where and why do people use SQL, and who uses it? For example, in my organization, there is a significant gap between the business analysts having access to our internal and external databases and the data analyst that could benefit from having more insight into the data. The BAs know SQL and pull data for other teams, but have little industry knowledge about the data. The data analyst knows the data, but does not have access to query the database. It would be useful to know if this tends to be standard procedure or if organizations tend to have more overlap in their teams. Barb, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, and I actually saw some of these questions come in ahead of time and put them in my slides. So if you don't mind, if I quickly could share screen, I have a little bit of a graphical answer for this one. Awesome, you're muted, but that looked like absolutely, so good. And yeah, this is basically usually where I start with these types of presentations anyway, which is what is SQL, like kind of who uses it, high level overview, and then I will answer that other part of the question specifically. So just to start out with, I think the biggest confusion people have is they're like, is SQL a program? Is it a language? And I saw another question kind of come in along these lines too. So when you hear the word SQL, it does mean just the language, structured query language. That's what it stands for. So it's a language, a computer programming language that you type into programs to interact with databases. Now, there's a bunch of ways that you can interact with a database. You can create a database, you can change the data inside a database, you can pull data from the database for analysis. I'm going to focus mostly on pulling the data from the database for analysis because that's what most data analysts do. So I did notice a couple of you are thinking maybe about this other career track where you're kind of like a database manager or creating databases, or you're like in the IT world. That is definitely another use case of SQL. So they're usually separated out. Like usually if you're in more of the IT space and that world, you're doing database creation, you're writing scripts that will take data from like an API or somewhere else and pull it into your company's personal database, and then you're like managing all that. Data analysts, on the other hand, usually are not creating the data in the database, modifying it, giving people permissions, things like that. It's possible, I'm not saying never, but usually, especially for bigger companies, it's just not the case. Usually data analysts are only pulling the data from the database, just the little chunks that they need to do an analysis to get an answer to a question. And I think this is going to make a little bit more sense as I keep going on. So the key takeaway here is SQL stands for just the language. Well, where do you write that language? There are so many options, and it sounds like a couple of you might be already using some of these. All of these, I believe, now are free. I don't know if Oracle is still free, but Microsoft now has a free version. MySQL, SQLite, Postgres have always been free. And this is just kind of like you'd open up Microsoft Excel or any other program, Microsoft Word on your computer. You open up a program and it's got an interface for you to type the SQL language and interact with the database. And we're going to look at kind of a baby example in a second later. It's not a real SQL program, but it's really good for this purpose where I can't have everyone like download Postgres, within an hour. We have the limitation of an hour, unfortunately. Quickly to also go over this because I do think this is important for understanding what SQL is. It is different from Excel or Tableau. I think one of you mentioned Tableau and Power BI. Some things you can do in both, either SQL or Excel or one of these other programs, but SQL does not do data visualizations. Like I can't make a pie chart in SQL, it just won't do it. And the other major difference, especially with Excel, is Excel has a limit of like 1 million some rows. SQL has no limit. You can go many records as you want, as long as your computer can handle it. So It does depend on the computing power, but it won't stop you as a program. So a lot of people have that confusion of like, why would I have SQL and Excel, or do I need one or the other? And the answer is usually you're using them in conjunction. You're using SQL to pull the data from the database, and then Excel to do heavier analysis, and then the visualizations. So I'd love to do a quick quiz, and I know you all didn't think you'd be quizzed coming here. I promise there's no consequence. In the chat, how many people think that Microsoft Excel can run SQL queries, yes or no?
All right, we got 1, 2, whoop, whoop, whoop. All right.
We got a please yes in there. Someone's really hoping. Yeah, it's a mix. I always get a mix when I ask this. A little bit of a tricky question.
I got some private no's and yeses too. So yeah, there's a big mix here.
Big mix here. So the answer is technically no. No, it cannot. And there's a little bit of a caveat here. Oops, someone's drawing on the screen there. I don't know how that's happening. There's a little bit of a caveat in that you can connect Microsoft Excel to a SQL database, but Excel by itself cannot run a SQL query. Like, it doesn't understand the SQL language. If you type it into Excel, it's just going to mean nothing. But I know one of you asked that question about connecting Excel to SQL, so I will demonstrate that when we get a little bit further here too. So again, just really quick high level stuff, because this is all kind of critical for understanding SQL at the high level. This is what SQL, or kind of what's happening physically. There's a server somewhere. Usually it's sitting in one of Google or Amazon's warehouses, but your company might just have a literal server sitting in its office. And it looks like the old CPU, like, you know, for a desktop computer, but there's no mouse, there's no monitor, there's no keyboard. It's just a box that sits there, and the whole job of this box is to hold your company's data. And it's on pretty much all the time, so that when you open your SQL program and type in your SQL language, you can talk to this box and get the data back. So it's literally just like a computer that just sits there and is always on and stores the data. Within the server, you can have databases, and this is just a level of organizing your information. And then within each database, you can have multiple tables. So it's kind of like this hierarchy. And I'm going to tweet out these slides afterwards so everyone has access to them. So you can have this visual here. But you can also think of it kind of like a folder on your computer. Like the server is like a literal folder on your desktop, and a database is like multiple files within that folder. And then the table could be, a database is like a Microsoft Excel file in that folder, if you want to think of it in Excel land. And then a table would be like a worksheet inside your Excel file. It's kind of like that hierarchy. So you need to connect to a server in order to perform SQL queries. And that's something that I think, and I know this was yet another question. We got a lot of questions for today, was like, can I just like do this on my own? Usually no. Usually you do need somebody to set up the server and be hosting it, and that's not free. So even though it's free to download pgadmin and Postgres and like all the programs to run the SQL, someone has to pay to store the data somewhere. It's cheap, it's unless you have like millions and millions of records, but you can set up like a little baby database, and if it's really tiny, I think Amazon does have a free tier, but you have to have a database somewhere to query. We're going to use an online one through W3 Schools today where they host it, but somebody's got to host it somewhere. And then every single column in a table in a SQL database has to have one and only one data type. So it can be an integer, it can be text, it can be a date, it can be money. And I think I drew on the screen. I'm sorry, I don't know how to unannotate this.
Yeah, I was like, Zoom has a new feature, because I've never seen that either. And I was like, I'm not sure how to get that off, but there you are. Nice.
So yeah, I want you all to be able to read this. Yeah, so as long as it has, they all have to have one data type. And there's more than this. These are just probably the most common ones, but every single column has one and only one data type. And that's going to be important to remember for when we do a little bit of a demonstration. So last high level slide, I promise. So this is what typically happens in a corporate environment if you're a data analyst. Someone comes to you, maybe it's the marketing department, maybe it's your boss, and says, I have a question. I want to understand our Facebook page stats better, or I want to understand our sales. Your job then is to open up your SQL program, type in the query that gets you exactly the data that you need to answer that question, no more, no less. And that's important because you can't just pull all the data all the time. First of all, you wouldn't want to. I mean, you'd have to have data everywhere. But then secondly, like I said, your computer can only hold and deal with so much data at a time. The servers are built for like holding massive, massive amounts of data. You can't pull all of that at once onto your computer. It won't work. It'll crash. It'll just not work. So that's what SQL is for data analysts, is pulling the data that you need to answer the question. Usually that involves writing the query and exporting it into a CSV file and then opening that CSV file in Excel or Tableau. You can actually connect Tableau directly to the database if you want to too. Like, there's a bunch of options, but eventually you have to get to some analytics program that will let you do more hardcore analyses and then make charts. It's almost always the case. So 95% of the time, this is your workflow, steps 1, 2, and 3, and then you'll repeat that for the next question that comes in. Is everybody good so far?
Yes, I'm good. And if you all want to drop in the chat any other questions, or specifically to what Barbara's presenting right now. Okay, good. We got a round of applause of yes. Great. Good so far. Let's continue, Barb.
Okay. So Mariella, I will leave it up to you. Do you want to start tackling some of those questions, or can I go forward with an example of SQL?
Go ahead and go with the example.
Okay, great. And hopefully it'll answer a bunch of the questions too in the same time. So if you all don't mind, I would love it if you please go to this website, and I just put it in the chat so that you can follow along. If you want to follow along, you can also sit back, relax, and just watch if you want to, but I do recommend typing along with me. It is the best way to learn, and it's obviously going to be a relatively short coding session since we have a lot of questions to get to. We're limited to an hour, but it's better than nothing, and it's, you know, the best way to learn is definitely by doing. So you got to open up this W3 Schools editor here. If you don't see this database on the right here, please click the Restore Database button. You need to see these tables. And I'm going to orient you while you're all getting here. So in this fake environment, there is one server, which we are connected to. It doesn't tell us the server name here, but usually when you're in a real SQL program, it will tell you the name of the server. There is one database inside this server. Again, we don't really have the name of the database because this is a practice environment, but in real life, you have the name of the database listed as well. And these tables are within that database. So that's our hierarchy here. One server, one database in that server, and multiple tables within that database. And these are the names of the tables. I want to make sure everybody is at this point. Everybody good? You got the link open?
Yeah, let us know in the chat if you had problems opening the link, or if you need, okay, good, all good, perfect. If we don't hear any no's, let's continue, Barb. You're doing a great job. But someone wrote me privately saying, yay, live demo, super exciting. So we appreciate you doing this with us, Barb.
Sure, of course. Okay, like I said, everything is in the slides and this is recorded too. So if you do get a little bit lost, it's there. There are 3 basic SQL commands that almost all of your queries are going to have. If you can even get these 3 down, you're in very good shape for SQL. Of course, there's many more, but these are like, I've had many colleagues say 95% of what you're going to do in SQL. Select, from, and where. Select picks the columns from a table. This is usually pretty subjective. Unless you really need very specific columns for a very specific reason, usually you can just bring back all the columns, or it's not a huge deal, like if you're just kind of exploring the database. The from is very important and specific. That's which table do I want to pull from. So we saw that there are all these tables in the database. You have to tell it which one to look in. It won't just look in the whole thing. So you have to be very specific. And then the where statement filters the rows in your result of your query by some condition. And we're going to go through examples of all 3 of these to have it make more sense. It's important to note that the asterisk means all columns, and that's pretty much what we're going to use only for this demonstration. But like I said, if you wanted to pick specific columns, you could just list them out, separated by commas, if you wanted to do that. But for now, we're just going to pull back all of them. This is a pretty tiny database. So let's write our first query together. And I'm imagining for a lot of you, it is actually your first query ever, which would be so exciting. But if some of you have some experience before, then it's not your first query, but still exciting. So we're going to say, yeah. Select all from the categories table. So that's it. It's literally select asterisk from categories. We'll type it together. And thank you, Jamie. Yes, woot. This is exciting. I know. We'll do oh, so you can delete what's in here. And I do recommend just deleting it. That's their example, and starting from scratch so we can get practice typing it together. Select asterisk, and no, it's not case sensitive. It's good practice to do the select in all uppercase, but you'll get lazy, so you don't have to do it. From customers. And that, if I run that, I should see the entire customers table. So if you hit the Run SQL green button, and I can see I've got a bunch of customers. Oh, I'm sorry, I said categories, didn't I? From cat, it doesn't matter, but either way, here's what the categories ones looks like. You can pull from any table, as you can see. Did everybody get that working? Everybody get output?
All right, we don't have any no's or, okay, perfect. So got it, perfect. Good.
All right, congrats if it was your first query, yay. It was, I know, so exciting for me. Yay. So now I'm gonna have you try a similar one on your own and take what we just did, which should be already in your editor, just change it. You know, hint is you only have to change one thing. Change it so that you're pulling back the products table instead. And once you're done that, in the chat, just tell me how many rows you got in the products table. That'll verify that we did it correctly. So I'll leave the question up here. We're just modifying one thing in the other query.
All right, we got 77.
Yeah, that was fast. Look at that. Okay.
Nice.
Great. Let me, since we're short on time, I'll go through it quickly. Usually I would leave more time for people to do this, but we do have a lot to get through. So you literally just have to change categories to products and run. And yep, you can see right here, it's telling me the number of records is 77. Perfect. Great. Let's try to get a where in there now. So we've done select and from. Let's say that now we want to filter that products result to only products where the price is greater than 20. So if we look at our output, right, there's a price column here. And notice that there is no dollar sign. So sometimes in some programs, there's a money data type and it'll handle dollar signs, but this one does not. I think this is based on MySQL in the background that we can't see. So we don't want to put the dollar sign in when we're filtering. But we want to bring back only ones that are above $20. So like this one should come back, this one should come back, and the other ones should be gone. So we wouldn't have a total of 77 rows anymore, we're gonna have less. So let's do this together. Select all stays the same. From product stays the same. We're gonna enter down one, and you don't have to enter, but it's best practice. But if you do it on the same line, it'll still work. Where price is greater than 20. And run, and then boom. Yes, I see a couple of you already got it. You should get 37 rows. So this is all SQL does, is if you're a data analyst, you know, you're pulling from the database, you're filtering, sometimes you might do some aggregations, and then eventually you'll export it. I don't think this, you know, kind of baby editor here, this is obviously just for practice. This W3 Schools thing has an export button, but the real ones do. If you're, and I'll make a note for the IT people, because I know there's a couple of you here. If you're an IT person, oftentimes you're going to be doing a little bit different statements. It's going to be like create table, and you're going to be creating a table, dropping tables. You could change a data type or write a script that connects from Python to pull data into the SQL. So just to give that context, like there's so many other uses for this, and that could be a whole job in itself, is like basically managing the database, and you're not actually doing any analysis on it, and it usually is a separate job. But this is just pulling data for right now for this purposes of this. Good. All right, I don't see any questions or concerns coming in the chat. I will press on.
Good on, I love this.
Good, there's one more. And this is it. How many of our customers live in Madrid? So let's say your boss came to you, the owner of this big company, and said that. One of the most challenging things about SQL, and again, one of you asked a question about this, so you're all like way ahead, is how do you turn a business question into a SQL query? It is very challenging and not something obviously we're gonna pick up in an hour, but I will just, if it makes you feel better, you're not alone if you find that to be a monumental task and very hard, and it takes a lot of practice. And I know people don't wanna hear that, but that is just kind of, unfortunately, it's like learning a language, you just have to practice. But give this one a try on your own, and let me know how many rows you get in the result. And I don't have too many hints for this one, so you have to kind of think, which table do I need to pull information from? What might I need to filter by? It's only what we've learned so far, so it's not anything new or special. And it is really tough to have this skill of like this question might not even be too bad, but sometimes they can get more complex, and then it really gets more challenging.
All right, we got a couple people who have written their answer in the chat. Let's give just a couple more seconds for anyone who might need some more time.
Yeah, exactly. And I know this is fast, but we only have an hour. We're limited, and it's a Friday.
Yes. All right, so we've got some people who have put 3 in the chat box.
Perfect, that is correct. And I'll go through it here, but the solution is on the slides if you got stuck. So you had to identify that we needed to use the customers table for this one. And I know you guys don't know this database very well. So I know that might have been a tough thing to figure out so quickly, but here's all of our customers and it tells us where they live, the city. So I wanted to say where city equals and then Madrid. And technically we didn't do an example with text before. So you might have had to have a little bit of, in all fairness, prior knowledge that you can just say equals and then the name of the city in quotes. So it's a little bit different from when we did like greater than 20, but this was it. And the example, or the point of this example, is also to show you can filter based on text as well. It doesn't just have to be like greater than or less than a number. You can filter this way. There's so many other ways to filter in SQL too. These are probably the 2 most basic. Is, does it equal this text, or is it greater than or less than some number? So you should have gotten 3 rows for that one.
And Barb, we have a question in the chat here. For text, can you use both as far as the quotation marks, the 1 and the 2?
Yeah, so some programs only accept single quotes. I think Postgres only accepts single quotes. So, and I should have said this before, they're all unfortunately slightly different, but don't worry, they're not like so significantly different that you have to like relearn the whole thing. Like if you use Postgres, your company uses Postgres, the syntax will be a little bit different than a company who uses Microsoft SQL, but the differences are really small. Like this is an example of a difference, and this is pretty small, right? Do I use double quotes or single quotes? Like the main concepts, like select from and where, that will never change across any program that you're using. So I think for this one, I mean, we can try it, but I don't know if this one is, I imagine this one's running MySQL, and yeah, in this case, it'll do either the single quotes or the double quotes. Right, you wouldn't do both at the same time. It would be one or the other, but yeah, this one will take both, but some of them won't. So it's just whichever one your company decides to go with, you have to kind of figure that out. There's a great book too called SQL in a Nutshell, I think, by O'Reilly. It's an O'Reilly book for sure. I think it's like an iguana on the front of it. And it goes through all the different versions. So like, let's say you want to do XYZ in SQL, you can see how would I do this in Microsoft versus Postgres versus Oracle versus, you know, whatever. And again, usually though, the differences are like so minute. Like it's not going to be a major thing that you have to relearn. Great question.
Awesome.
All right. So I obviously wish we could keep all, but I do have to answer the questions. I did put a little contact information slide in here too. So once I tweet this out, this is how you can reach me too. And I'll say it again at the end of the chat. But I will stop sharing for now.
Awesome. And we'll also put this in the rewatch email that we'll send all of our live callers so that you have access to those quick links. So thank you, Barb. I really appreciate it. Do you want me to go ahead and share now?
Yes, if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah.
And I will leave time in case anyone else has live questions.
Awesome. No worries. And yes, please continue to drop your questions in the chat. If you want to hop off of mute, feel free to do that as well. And I think this is a great question to start off with after your demo. Is SQL a good place to start for those who have never coded before?
I actually would say yes to this, like 100%. This is a great question. Python, R, JavaScript, all those other languages, they are much harder than SQL. So SQL is, I think it is a good place to start because it is a little bit simpler than the others.
Awesome. So I know that we had some people write in the chat that they were thinking of doing some career changes or, you know, trying to figure out the best way to start. So again, if this is your question or if you want to dive deeper, please let us know. Someone here has written, what is the way to have, okay, wait, we're going back to your demo. Do you mind answering a quick demo question?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So you could have multiple conditions in where with a or, so you'd say, or an and statement. It's literally the word or and. So you'd say where city equals Madrid and name not equal to Diego, if that was what you were looking for. So not equals to is exclamation equal point, equal sign in SQL, in most SQL programs.
Awesome, cool. I think you answered that question. So thank you so much. Let's move on to the next one here. Do you think SQL will continue to be relevant in light of Python and other data-focused languages and techniques?
This is another great question. And I teach a Python class actually for one of my clients. And it is, this question just came up in that too. And we got in a nice heated debate over this. Not me, but the students did. I do pretty much everything in Python. So you can connect to a SQL database right from Python. You never have to leave Python. You can write SQL queries right from Python. I don't know though if it would totally replace SQL ever. I think SQL is pretty deeply entrenched in a lot of places. And the students, again, they made some points about how they think SQL might go a little bit faster in some circumstances, or, you know, why would you need to go to Python if all you need to do is SQL? Like I said, Python is significantly harder to learn. So if you're thinking from like an employee training standpoint, it would make much more sense to train employees in SQL than Python if that's truly all you need. So I don't think it's going away by any means. Like, I think I read a stat once that like, oh my God, like over 90% of companies in America use SQL. Like it's, you know, it's huge, widely used. Like I can't imagine it disappearing. So I do think it's important to learn. And I do see it more and more in, I'm not applying for a job, but I, you know, browse and I see people posting things and people mention it a lot.
And actually, I just wanted to flag someone has written earlier in the chat a little bit about their background, and it just reminded me as you were speaking about looking for a job and recruiting and things like that. So someone says, I'm a recruiter and want to know more about SQL so I understand it when candidates talk to me about their experience. And I think that's a great perspective to have. So Barb will keep that in mind as well. And just because I'm going over people's backgrounds, I just want to touch base on another one. I'm a PhD student in neuroscience. I analyze most of my data using R. After my PhD, I want to move into industry, hopefully as a bioinformation, how do you say that? Wow, bioinformation person. I don't know the exact word to call that. And I've been told that SQL is helpful for this, but I don't really know anything about SQL. So great, we've already learned so much. I've learned so much, even just, you know, in that first demo. And again, you know, Barb is happy to talk with you all offline after this chat since we don't have a lot of time to dive deeper. But with that said, you're always welcome to put your questions in the chat here. So let's move on to the next one here. Are there jobs that only require SQL, or do you often also need to know other programming languages?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit when I was thinking of this question during the presentation, is if you're like a database administrator, like I was saying, or someone who's managing a database, like typically that's in an IT department, you might have an entire job that is just SQL. If you want to be a data analyst, though, who's like aggregating data, making charts and dashboards, you would need some other skill. It might not be another programming language necessarily, like, you know, it could be Excel, Tableau, Power BI, something like that. But you would need something else other than SQL for the data analysis career track. And it could be Python or R.
Awesome. Wow, I love that we're flying through these questions. So keep that in mind because that can give you an opportunity to chime in with some last minute questions as well towards the end. All right, so we had someone here write in the chat, thanks for the demo. Can you recommend a reference book which goes over SQL in detail?
Yeah, well, the one that I mentioned, it doesn't like teach you SQL. It just kind of goes over like the different commands and different programs. In terms of learning SQL, I don't have one off the top of my head that I particularly like have gone through and really like, although I will say the O'Reilly series, and I'm not paid by them, I promise, is just very good. Like I've used them a lot for other things, like in other, you know, in my career, and I don't think I've ever been disappointed by one of their books. So if they have an Intro to SQL book, I think that would be a good one. I don't even know if they have one, though. But they're the ones that publish the SQL comparison book. But yeah, I don't have too many book recommendations for SQL, unfortunately. There's so many online, like coding boot camps and for SQL too, free. A lot of them are free. So, I mean, you could find so many resources. I think most of the good resources are online for SQL.
Well, you have someone here who's advocating for you to write one since you since you have so much to share and so, many tips and tricks. So thank you for encouraging Barb to write one, and I second that. I would definitely support that and share it with our Power to Fly community. We have someone else who has written here. Let's see here. Used to be a business analyst and internal tech developer to extract DB for us to drill, so no data analyst role specifically. If you have time, good. If you have time, it would be great to learn a bit about joins, which seem to be what everyone thinks is really complicated.
Yeah, so for that first comment, right, usually, unfortunately, I've heard this a lot where people work in places where the data analysts have to ask someone else to pull the data for them. And that is kind of an unfortunate situation. And I know that's one of the questions coming up too. Obviously, I would advocate to your company to invest in SQL training for the data analysts so that they can grab it themselves, because I hear this all the time, is the IT people are pulling the wrong data, or they don't understand the context, so right, it's not really coming through correctly. So yeah, that is definitely a struggle, and I do think it's better typically when the analysts pull the data themselves, but if you don't have control over that, what are you going to do? In terms of the joins, yeah, we can demonstrate a join. I don't know which two tables might link to each other off the top of my head in that database, but we can take a look together if you want. Mariella, should we do that now or get through the questions first, and then if we have time at the end?
I'm happy to go through a demo if you'd like. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Yeah, I can share my screen and we can see if we can find two that can be joined. I'm going to share my screen.
Right.
So when you're joining tables, you have to find a column that they have in common. So you all can do this with me as an exercise that I haven't looked through for this particular purpose. So you've got, for example, here a customer ID. It's usually an ID number that you need to match the tables on, because you can't just merge two tables and not tell SQL how to do it, right? It's got to know what to compare. So here's customer ID in this one. I've got city, county. These are columns that are typically found in other tables. So let me look at the orders. And oh, great. Customer ID is in the orders. So I can merge those two tables based on customer ID. Perfect. So I would do that by saying select, and I'm just going to say all columns just to be easy for right now, from customers. And I'm going to do an inner join. It's just the most popular join, and it just says keep only what they have in common to match up people. So if there's an order placed by a customer who's not in the customer's table, it won't show up. Basically, the person has to be in both tables for it to show up. Inner join orders. And then there's two ways you can do this. Since the column name is exactly the same in both tables, you could say using customer ID, and I believe this should work. That might be a Postgres. No, it worked. If the column name was not the same, you'd have to say on customers.customer ID equals orders.customer ID. So you have to use the on keyword instead. But these two lines here that I have highlighted do exactly the same thing. It's just you can only do the using if, again, the column name is identical. And you can see here, it pulled in the data from both tables. And I don't think I can scroll here, unfortunately. Is there a scroll bar at the bottom? Oh, they really just output the whole thing, don't they? Oh, here it is. There is a scroll bar. So you can kind of see, you could scroll over, but it's pulling in all of the data now. So I'm getting the customer's information and their order information. So it's this order date, the order ID, like I say, employee ID who handled that order, whatever else. So now the data is all together in one output. And yes, this is super common. I mean, this is a more advanced topic though, and obviously for an intro class might be a little bit challenging, but it is a super common thing to do. This is a top thing you should learn in SQL. And I'll copy this code and put it in the chat.
Awesome. I really appreciate you showing that. If anyone else, has any last minute demos that Barb can pull up on her screen, that'd be great. Thanks for putting that in the chat here. So I see you're reading that someone has just mentioned in the chat here. If you already have a SQL background, what's the next best language or platform I should learn for data analysts and presentation in the shortest time?
So my personal opinion on this is I like Tableau a lot, but it is very expensive. So a lot of companies don't want to pay for Tableau. So I don't know if I would invest a lot of time in Tableau for that reason. Is only certain companies are really going to ask you, and Tableau is point and click. So it's pretty comparably easy to pick up, compared to SQL or Python, because you don't have to do any coding for most of it. You can do coding in Tableau, but you could get through your whole career without a line of code in Tableau. I would personally choose, I would not choose Click. Again, just personal, not a big fan. Python, I would go with Python next. And I actually started with R. I really like R, but R was kind of started in academia. It has a very narrow purpose. I know one of you said that you code in R and you're in like the pharmaceutical industry. Like R seems to be very specific to, it's being picked up by specific industries, and it's getting better with like deploying to the web and other things, but Python just has such a large community. There's so many help articles. It has other uses too, like where you can, if you ever needed to like go to other things, I just feel like you'd be a better candidate for a variety of jobs if that's your goal, if you had Python. So it's a heavy lift though. Like it's not something you're gonna pick up in a week or a month or even like 6 months. Like it might take a year to get fully comfortable with Python. But if you have that capacity, that's what I would go for.
And to echo what you said earlier, practice makes perfect, right? So I know that we want things fast and in a hurry, but to really get to escalate, it might take some time.
You're not going to learn French overnight. You're not going to learn Python overnight, right? It's the same thing.
Awesome. And so we have just a quick question here. Should I learn Ruby or would JavaScript be more useful?
Yep, I see that. So I have never heard of a data analyst using Ruby. So if you're going for data analysis, I would not go for Ruby. If you want to be a software developer and develop apps, then Ruby would be good for that. In terms of JavaScript, I actually do use JavaScript very often because I deploy visualizations and dashboards to the web for my clients. So I often will have clients that say, we don't really care how you do it. So I'll say, listen, if you let me do it in Python and I use this library called HighCharts, I can deploy your dashboard to the web. So you log in and you can see your dashboard on any device, right? So it's totally scalable, whether you're on a phone or whatever, and you could be on vacation in Mexico and see it, all you need is a browser. So if you want to deploy data visualizations or really anything to the web, then yes, you would have to know JavaScript. But if you're doing something like internal for a company where they don't need it on the web or anything, then no, you wouldn't. I don't think most data analysts know JavaScript. And then I see them coming in, Marielle. So, right, SAS. Yeah, SAS is very specific to the pharmaceutical industry. I don't know anybody outside of pharma that uses SAS. And that's right. I'm sorry, that was the whole question. Yeah, great.
Awesome. Thank you all for being so on it in this chat. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that Barb does too. Let's move on to this question here that you all submitted earlier. If this is your question and you want to chime in, or even if it's not, we can dive in deep as much as you all would like. How can you make the transition between just basic SQL queries and start working on real life projects? I love this question. What are some of the ways that you suggest to get some hands-on practice with SQL?
Yeah, I was alluding to this a little bit earlier. And again, I was thinking of this question before when I was saying like, it's so hard to translate a business question into SQL sometimes. So that in itself is a skill that takes practice. And then also when you get to the more complex SQL queries, I think actually what trips the most people up is all the parentheses, like they can get complex and nested and, you've got functions in there and whatever. So losing track of even like a parentheses, your whole thing will just not work. And it's like sometimes just one little character off, which is so frustrating, but that is tough. And then also kind of keeping track of nested stuff. So when I say functions, it's not like a JavaScript or a Python function, if you're familiar with those. It's like a function in Excel, right? Where you say like sum of this data or this column. You can sum a column in your table in SQL too, but sometimes maybe you want to like, cast something as a different data type and sum it and do all these other things to it. And then you get like function inside a function inside a function. And that's when people tend to start getting lost. So again, it is just practice. I do have a suggestion for hands-on practice. It's called HackerRank. And for those of you who are looking for jobs, it's a great resource too, because employers use it to test candidates for jobs. And it is free for you to sign up, and they have free practice SQL problems. So we can send that out in the email after Mariella.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's move on to this next question here. What is the best way to incorporate SQLs into my daily work, even when my position does not require it?
And I did kind of answer this one in the demo, and the answer is like you have to set up a server somewhere. So if that's not easy, like it's not something you would just pick up too. So unless you really strongly feel that you want to learn it and you like want to go through that down that road, usually you wouldn't just incorporate it on your own. Like somebody else in your company would have to say, all right, we want all of our data on a server, which, I mean, in my opinion, every company on earth should have that, right? You should have a dedicated server with all your company's data that's backed up and in one place. And we help people do that all the time and like get that set up and then analyzing that data too. But if your company doesn't already have that, I do think that typically they would set it up. Like, again, you can go and find a tutorial online of like, how do I set up a server on Amazon or whatever, but like it would, it's not like a straightforward process. Yeah, now there is a program called SQLite browser, which you don't have to go through that whole process, but it's not a real SQL program. Like you'd be just doing it for your own practice. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't be using it for any real purpose, if that makes sense.
Great. And if this was your question and you're on the line, if you want, to give more specifics, let us know. In the meantime, we've got someone asking about HackerRank. Does it help you learn or just practice?
Just practice. For learning, there are so many free things out there. And actually, this is another question that's coming up. So maybe we can skip it when we get to it. But someone was asking, like, I'm about to take a boot camp. Where should I start? And I would start with some of those free ones out there because they do start from scratch and they're supposed to kind of help you learn. Like, I'm trying to think of what the one is called. I'm blanking on it. I think it starts with this Coursera or something like that. But if you Google like learn SQL online free, so many things. Well, there's so many of them. They might only give you an intro lesson or two, but if you're prepping for a boot camp, that's all you would need. And then some of them are more intensive. Like Stanford University has a free online SQL course, and it's the whole thing. Like it's an entire SQL course that they teach to their undergraduates. The videos for that course are very easy to follow. The exercises are like insanely hard though. So that actually might be a great place to start though with the videos if you really want a full free SQL experience. The professor is very engaging. I think it's a really quality course, but don't beat yourself up if you don't get the exercises for Stanford because they are exceedingly difficult. HackerRank would be better to start with for exercises. Stanford is better for content.
And then we have some people who have written in the chat. Flatiron has some awesome free courses, and Khan Academy has one.
Yeah, there's so many. Yeah, any of those I'm sure would be great.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to the next question here. And if you've already touched on any of these questions and you want to dive deeper, if you want to skip along, we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone wants to take this opportunity to hop off mute, then now's your chance. I like database organization and web dev. Do I need to choose just one to specialize in?
I guess this is more of a personal Barb's worldview than answer. Like I don't. I'm sure there are people that maybe somehow fit both into their lives, but I don't think they typically like front end and the back. I guess you could try to be a full stack developer maybe, but I probably would personally just pick one to focus on and maybe do the other as a hobby or something, because you could make a career for sure out of either of them by themselves. But I mean, there are some people that I'm sure can find out how to combine them, and maybe there's like some rare jobs out there where you can do it. But yeah, I don't know of any in particular off the top of my head.
For sure, it's probably a resume booster. You can do all of those things. All right, let's move on to the next one. What was the toughest part of switching from straightforward queries to ones that were more complex? And if you want to give any of your background, your journey to get how you got to where you are today, that would be nice as well, so that some of our newbies can get some of your story there. And I know that you're working on that book since they're advocating for you to work on that book. So it's a good time to start.
I answered this a little bit before with like the nesting of the functions, but I will add, because that is a great idea, Marielle. I didn't even think to talk about like kind of my journey. I guess what really was like shocking to me was when I first started with SQL was at the insurance company, and it would take hours sometimes to run SQL queries for a couple reasons. Number one, the database was so large. And then secondly, it was really disorganized. Like nothing was written down. Nobody really knew what was in there. It was that whole like, what if you get hit by a bus thing, tomorrow, like what would we all do? It was really bad. That's not a good scenario to be in. So the worst part though, was sometimes it would take literally all morning for a query to run. And I'd be like, okay, like it ran, here we go. And they're like, oh, actually that's not the right data because of like XYZ. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? Like it was just so frustrating. And So yeah, like with these complex queries, right, the more complex the query, usually the longer it takes to run. And then, you have more potential for issues, but people get so frustrated when they see SQL errors. And I'm like, thank your lucky stars when you get a SQL error. Like, that's the best thing you could get. The worst thing is when it runs, you get an answer and you're like, yeah, I think this answer is correct. And it's not. That's so much worse. So yeah, at least the good news is SQL will stop you right away if you have an error, and it won't do the rest of the query. But the worst part is when you get to these complex ones, something is off. That's not like a syntax thing. It's like a logic thing, or half of the battle in SQL is understanding the database. Like, for example, let's say you're looking for all your customers in Pennsylvania, right? And somebody in the history of the company put PA for Pennsylvania, and somebody else put PENN, and somebody else put PA dot. SQL doesn't know those are all Pennsylvania. So you could be pulling the wrong information, but it's not going to give you an error. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of the toughest parts, if that helps.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that must have been very frustrating. I can just even see it as you're retelling the story. But yeah, so we have another question here. If going into software dev engineering, is it better to specialize in back end, front end, or would I be best off going full stack?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not a software developer, so I don't know how to fully answer this. I mean, I have a lot of software developer friends, and we work with development firms for my company. I do think it's your preference, though. I think backend, if you're like concerned with salary, backend might be paid more, and full stack would be paid more. But other than that, I mean, front end is still great, though. They're paid well, and it's a great thing to do. So I think it just depends on what you prefer to do. They're all highly needed.
Great answer. Thank you for that. And then we just have like one question about queries here. What's the query to read how many lines the table has before you select the star asterisk, just in case the DB is so huge and hangs and crash?
Yeah, I would do a count. So it would be select count asterisk. So I'll put that in the chat, and then from the table name. Sorry, I keep forgetting the chat doesn't have the option to do multiple lines. So that came in 2 messages, but you should all see it there. You could just count, and that should go pretty quickly, even if there's millions of records, and tell you how many are there.
Awesome. Moving right along here. What are some tools and techniques to level up my query writing skills? And I know that you've mentioned some of them before, but if you have any last minute ones, or if anyone on the chat wants to mention any.
Yeah, I think we could probably skip this one. I mean, again, it's like HackerRank, all those online classes. I teach a SQL class for General Assembly. There's other people. Udacity is a really good one too. There's so many out there.
All right, so let's move on to this next one. And I'm gonna have to ask your, how do I pronounce this? I'm guessing it's SOQL, since you're saying SQL. Are Salesforce SOQL queries the same as SQL queries?
Yeah, so I don't do too much with Salesforce, although I'd love to. Like, I'm always hoping a client will come with Salesforce, but I am familiar with it a little bit, and I think they're slightly different. It is kind of like Salesforce's own language, but they're very similar. There's a lot of programs that are like that. I used to use one, I think forever ago, called like Crystal Reports or something like that, and it was the same scenario where like all the concepts are the same, but the language is just kind of slightly different. So like, I guess they don't call it SQL because it's technically not, but it's so similar that you wouldn't have significant difficulty making the switch or transitioning from one to the other. But so these will be more different though than like one SQL program to another. So going from like PostgreSQL to Microsoft SQL will be like baby differences, and then going from one of those to Salesforce or Crystal Reports would be like bigger differences, but not so big that, again, it's like going to be a problem.
Awesome. And then speaking about differences, can you just jump into this question here? What's the difference between these two?
Yeah, so, and I hope I've clarified this by now, but so Postgres is just one of the flavors, if you will, of SQL. So there's all those different companies that offer SQL. So the question is, you wouldn't ask like, what's the difference between PostgreSQL and SQL? Remember, SQL is the language. Postgres is just one of the flavors of that language. And then there's the programs that you can use to run it. So if we like go with the Postgres line, right? PostgreSQL is what they call their variant of SQL language. PG admin is what they call the program for running their variant of SQL language. For Microsoft, they call their variant of the SQL language, I think, T-SQL, and their program is Microsoft SQL Server. So every company has the program to run it, and they're like slightly different version of SQL, and that they've named that way. But there's really no, like, they're all SQL in the baseline, and they're all so close that there's no difference.
Awesome. Let's move on to this question here. I'm taking an Intro to SQL course on the 25th and want to be prepared. What is a good way to go into the course on this topic? And what recommendations do you have on the best ways to practice? Well, we've gone through that answer.
Yeah.
You want to touch on anything else?
I don't have anything else. No, yeah, we definitely went through this one.
All right. Awesome. All right. How do you link Excel with SQL?
I am happy to do a quick demo. I know we're very short on time, but if you're okay with that, Mariella, I could show everyone where it is.
Absolutely. Let me just unshare here my screen.
And I think there's question too. And no, I wouldn't say Postgres is much more powerful than SQL. It's just SQL. I would say it's one of the better SQL ones. Like, I choose Postgres, but I wouldn't like word it that way right now. So if you're in Microsoft Excel and you want to connect to a database, you go to the data menu up here in the ribbon. And I'm on a Mac, so I have fewer options, and Microsoft does that on purpose. But if you're on a PC, you're going to have a lot more options. But you could say new database query and say from either database or the SQL Server. You can get it from text or HTML. When you're on a PC, there's like a ton more. But basically, whatever you choose is going to open up this little box, and you have to give it the name of the server, the name of the database, which you don't have to fully give the name of the database, but you can pick it later. And you do have to have a username and a password. And you need that even if you're connecting to Postgres or any other, like, regular through the SQL thing. Like, it's like logging into anything else. You need the username and password. Once you connect to one in this box, you hit connect and it takes you to the next screen. And that's where you can actually submit a query. But again, Microsoft Excel is not running the query. It's sending it to the SQL program, which runs the query and then brings the data back. And you can have a live connection too. I used to do this at the insurance company all the time, where we had a live connection to our server, and you can hit this refresh button and it will pull in all the data from the server connection that you have in real time. So it's pretty nice. I can show you all Postgres too quickly while I'm sharing my screen, although I know we are really running out of time. So
yeah, no, you have time. Go ahead, go for it.
Okay, Postgres opens up in the browser, and let me see if it opened up in a different browser here, but oh, it's still opening. It used to open up on its own, like you would Microsoft Office, like Word or whatever, in its own program. But now it actually opens up within a browser tab, but it's still the same kind of concept. And it looks a little bit intimidating when you first see it. But you can see to the left here, once this loads, it lists out all the servers that I'm connected to. It's coming. So here I can see I'm on a bunch of different servers. And once I click into one, and I picked a bad one, I guess I have to pick, oh, these might have been shut down. It's been a very long time since I did this. I use Postgres differently is what I should say. Like, I'm on Postgres all the time, but I haven't logged into this particular one. And then here's the list of databases. And then you could see once you're in a database, you have to kind of dig down a little bit further, but then you can get your list of tables that are in that database. So this is what a real SQL program looks like. So obviously very different than this little editor that we were using, but it's not too bad. It's literally, all the same syntax and everything. I'd say select all from Django session, and I pick a table name and I run it and I can see the data.
Awesome. Well, what a great way to end this chat. I really appreciate you showing us your awesome demos. Thank you everyone for being super engaging on our chat box. So again, this has been recorded. We're going to put this on Power to Fly. We'll send a rewatch email to you all who have joined us live with all of the links that Barb mentioned. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Barb, is there anything else you want to leave us with? How can we find you? Offline, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, can you direct them to you?
Can I send that out in the post-course, post-seminar email, Mariella? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all the information. And yeah, it was wonderful meeting everyone.
All right. Well, you all have a great Friday. I really appreciate taking the time to speak with you all today, and enjoy your weekend.
Bye.
Bye.